Let's talk about cognitive empathy. Who scored the highest out of all three categories, out of all three kinds of empathy? Who scored the highest in cognitive empathy? Raise your hand. Excellent. Anybody score over a 90? Anybody score over a 90 in cognitive empathy? Anybody score over an 80? Okay, wow. Excellent. Cognitive empathy. Listen to some of these statements. It's easy to explain to others what I mean after I see they don't understand it the first time. Usually people have low cognitive empathy. I can always tell because here's what happens. I explain something to you, Pastor John Paul, and you're not getting it, right? If I have high cognitive empathy, my mind goes to a second way of explaining it. Jesus has high cognitive empathy. Luke 15. He tells the same point 3 times in 3 different ways. Let me say this 3 different ways. All right, let's start out with lost coin. Okay, you're not getting that. Let's do lost sheep. Okay, we're still not getting that. Let's talk about a lost son. Okay, he's breaking it down in 3 different perspectives so that his audience can understand it. Everyone, the net is getting wider and wider. Someone doesn't have high cognitive empathy. You know what happens? They tell their side of the story, or they're teaching something, student isn't understanding it, and then they just get louder and say the same thing they said before. How many know what I'm talking about? Say, honey, go in the room and get my red coat. What room? I don't know what you mean. What red coat? Go in the room and get my red coat. What room? Now see, if you had high cognitive empathy, you would stop and go, wait a minute, hold on. She's probably confused about what room. She's probably confused if it's the red coat or the mauve coat. She's probably confused as why would I even want my coat right now? We're not leaving. We just got here. Cognitive empathy. I'm thinking as other people think. Therefore, I'm going to respond. I'm going to counter all those particular thoughts. Low cognitive empathy. Go get my red coat! How many would admit, I have had low cognitive empathy in my life? Listen, it's there. It's right in the way he put your brain together. It's hardwired into you. It's just a matter of using it. You haven't used it, and when you don't use it, you lose it. It's like anything else. If we put this to practice this week and next week, you and I are going to get stronger and stronger in this area. It's like a muscle, okay? You don't use it, atrophy. You use it, expands, it grows. Make sense? Okay. Second, emotional empathy. If you scored the highest out of all 3 categories in emotional empathy, raise your hand. Okay. Excellent. So compassion is pretty easy for you. It comes natural. You feel really quickly what other people feel, which, by the way, is so important. Just listen to some of these statements. I feel compelled to acknowledge people when I walk into a room. You can always tell if somebody has high emotional empathy. They walk into a room, they see somebody, there's like a nagging need inside of you to acknowledge that person. Let them know you know they're there. People with no emotional empathy walk right into a room just like this. You know what I'm talking about? Huh? This emotional empathy is so important, by the way, because when we lose touch with people, you know, Pharaoh, I want you to think about this in Exodus. Pharaoh ordered the slaughter. Pay attention. He ordered the slaughter of what Jewish historians, Josephus described as the slaughter of the Jewish sons, the massacre of the Jewish boys. Thousands and thousands of Jewish babies murdered at the order of Pharaoh. But yet someone, Pharaoh's daughter, carries a little baby named Moses into the palace. Once Pharaoh sees that baby, now the baby's welcomed into the palace. From what we know in the scriptures, it's very easy to infer. He was raised under Pharaoh's tutelage. He became a part of Pharaoh's family, part of his dynasty. Why? Because now Pharaoh, he gives an order. When it's just an order and I don't have to see anybody, I can kill 1 million people. But when I got to touch that baby and look at that baby, Stalin said these words. He said, the death of one is a tragedy. The death of 1 million is a statistic. Because when it's personal, when something is personal, I can feel what you feel. Now it's very difficult for me to harm you in any way. But when I can't feel what you feel, I lack emotional empathy. I lack that personal encounter. I just see it as a statistic. You're far from me. The further away we get from another, the more we lose emotional empathy. And the more we lose emotional empathy, the more dangerous things get. Amen? Right now, I believe, speaking as a perspective of a sociologist, we're seeing a rise in narcissism and a decline in empathy. And a lot of it has to do with this because we're away from each other. We're not touching each other. A scientist by the name of Milgram back in the 1940s, after the World War, a lot of scientists were trying to figure out how something like the Holocaust could happen. So psychologists were conducting all kinds of experiments to see how people can do the things that the Nazis did, how they could do the things in concentration camps that were done. One of the studies was known as Milgram Study. Dr. Milgram, he took a group of participants. He wanted to see how far they would go with evil when given a command by somebody they deemed as an authority. So he had a man dress up as a doctor. He put on a doctor's outfit. The doctor told the men to administer electrical shocks to a second group of participants. And the participants did exactly what the doctor told them to do. They kept administering the shocks. And they watched the level of intensity of the shocks get higher and higher. And they kept administering the shocks. Milgram was shocked to say, we just kind of do what authorities tell us to do. But there was a game changer. At some point, Milgram said, let's change the conditions of the experiment. Let's get those given the shocks to hold hands with the people they're shocking. And the minute they held the people's hands, they were no longer able to shock them. Pharaoh holds the baby. Now it's not just the slaughter of 1 million babies I can't see. Now it's a baby I feel, a baby I touch, a baby I hold. Now that baby becomes his son. So you and I, when we lose connection, we lose that empathetic connection with each other. We stop caring. Isn't it amazing? If you could think back on some of your haters, the people that did you wrong, that did you nasty, you back up and go, how could they do that to me? The more distance settles in between you and I, the more we stop caring, the lower emotional empathy, the more the destruction of our relationships. So where are my high emotional empathy people? Raise your hand. Awesome. You're going to spend some time with the cognitive types, okay? And you guys are going to learn from each other. All right, we're going to actually devise small groups in this church and make sure they're nice and mixed between cognitives and emotionals. Third, practical empathy. Who had highest on this? Raise your hand. Excellent. Any feedback, any thoughts, any insights on any three groups? Any questions? Anything that surprised you? Yes. You scored high where? In practical empathy. Was your score pretty high for emotional as well? Really? You may be tired. That happens. Listen, I got burnt out in pastoring. You know how I know I got burnt out? Because I was sitting down, year 16, fantasizing about how relaxing jail would be. My wife's like, what are you doing? Nothing. 2 hours. I'm visiting people at the mental hospital going, how long do they let you stay here? What did you say to get in? What do they do here during the day? So some of you are just tired, amen? It's like, yes, I was very emotional and compassionate when I was 20, but the older I get, the colder I get. I don't care anymore. Yes. Say it one more time.
How do you look at your lowest number versus your highest? What's the balance there? Like when you look at the lowest, if you're like in the low 30s on one and you're 90 on the other, you need to go to the hospital? Should we go
Yeah, as far as the number system, it's not so scientific. It's not that, I wouldn't say it's that sophisticated. But I mean, if you just kind of like look at law of averages, 50 is somewhere at the midpoint. So if you're below a 50, because 100 is the highest possible score in each of these categories, if you're below a 50, you probably need more practice in that area. Right? If you're a 10, you probably need some therapy. You probably need to go to that. Yes. Yes. Ah. Most of the time. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We'll talk to him a little bit later. We'll do coffee. Yeah, let's see. I got news for you. What she just did is I'm not even kidding now. She practiced practical empathy. She just came up with an exercise that said, you know what? Never mind how I think and what I feel about myself. What's important is how my spouse sees me. That's important to me. How many would agree how your spouse sees you? By the way, just in general, how people think about you is important. Stop saying you don't care what people think about you. The Bible says a name is more important than rubies. It's more precious than jewels. Your name, how people perceive you, is of asset. It's of value. In fact, I told one lady, I'm going to get back to your point in a second. She said 5 times in the conversation in 3 minutes, she said, I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care what anybody thinks of me. I said, ma'am, you just gave me 5 Freudian slips. She said, what do you mean? I said, you saying you don't care what people think of you is an inadvertent admission that you do care because you care that I know that you don't care. So all these people that go on Facebook in front of an audience of 5,000, I don't care what anybody thinks. Really? The post itself would say otherwise. Because you care that we all care that we know you don't care. Fathers from the Bronx, you know what I mean? It's stuff just, PhDs, that's nothing on being a city boy. You know that. But here's the deal. What she just said right there, that's a great exercise for some couples. Because now you're saying to your spouses, how you see me matters. Never mind me and how I see me. I'm way too in love with myself. I've got a secret love affair going on with me. It's been going on since birth. Now I am my greatest fan. Never mind me. I'm biased. How do you see me? I dare you, thank you for that. I'm going to use that in my next seminar. I dare you to go home tonight if you're married with somebody or maybe just living with somebody you're friends with and say, take this test for me. And then let it be a conversation. Let them talk. Listen to what they're saying. And then maybe you walk away from that having to make some tweaks and adjustments to how you go about being you so that you're better understood. Does that make sense? Does that help? Any other questions before we take a break and go into segment 2? Questions, insights, thoughts? Yes? No. Not at all, no. You know, we've put too much stock on introvert, extrovert, and personality psychology for too long. We had all sorts of stereotypes about what introverts were supposed to be like and extroverts are supposed to be like. Introverts are supposed to be more cerebral. Extroverts are supposed to be more socially in tune. Really, extrovert, introvert, if you want my perspective, and I know there are a lot of perspectives out there, it's just a matter of energy. Introverts, they fuel alone, and extroverts fuel usually through interaction. Many empathetic introverts, just as many empathetic extroverts. I wouldn't make that one model, that paradigm, all that it's become over the last 50 years because we've been surprised too often. You know, it was a stereotype that introverts were the best listeners. Not necessarily true. I know many introverts, you're talking to them and you think they're listening, but when the words finally come out of their mouth, the response, you think, where were you the last 20 minutes I was just talking? All right? So we put too much stock on that. The expressions of empathy may be affected by that. If someone is introvert, they may be more mild-mannered. So they may not be, oh my God. The extrovert may be over the top in their expression of an emotion. But I wouldn't say it affects whether or not someone's levels of empathy are higher, but the expression or the application may look different. Does that answer the question? Somebody else? Questions, insights? Yes. Go ahead.
So we can
Good idea.
Yeah, just so we can record.
Does it impact on communication? Since I'm emotional, he's practical.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's really, empathy is what paves the way for healthy, productive conversations. And yes, having particular types of empathy that differ from someone else, it could be a positive. You can complement one another. or it can be a negative. You can compete with one another. So it's going to go either way. It's going to be very complementary. I learned in life that you have what I don't have, and you and I are not, I'm not just bending with you, I'm blending with you. I'm realizing I need to blend with you. We're one flesh. You bring out the best in me. Or I can get stuck in ego, and it can become strife. So it can go either way. Hope that answers your question. Somebody else? Yes.
Just a comment. When we start taking this test, I knew that my wife would be emotional, and I knew that I would be practical from the very beginning.
Yes.
And our scores prove it.
And your scores prove it.
Yes.
Thank you. Excellent. Somebody else? Yes. Go ahead. Sure. Yes.
It's just for the live stream.
That's
Sorry.
great.
By the way, we having fun in here today?
So much.
Are we learning a lot? Yeah. Good. Yes.
So as a pastor, I'm looking at my scores and I'm like perfectly even keeled in the 70s, 71, 72, 74.
Wow.
I look at that and I immediately say, okay, maybe I'm doing a good job being balanced as a pastor. But then when I think a little bit more critically of myself, I'm thinking, am I being robotic? Because I want to be balanced.
Sure.
So I don't know, should there be more of a natural higher to lower? Does this maybe reveal to me on one side, okay, I'm doing a good job being balanced, but then on the other side, I'm a robot? I don't know.
Well, whether or not something is perfunctory or robotic or mechanical, it really comes down to motive. I think you're wanting to please God. You're wanting to be a good pastor, and there's some effort involved with that, but effort doesn't necessarily mean mechanics. I mean, we've got to make efforts. We have to realize we're weak in a certain area. We develop skills. Skills are usually what compensates where we're weak. And I think that I don't think that that's necessarily an indication that you're perfunctory in what you do. No, you can be. Anybody can be. I mean, I feel it sometimes. You ever feel perfunctory, like robotic? Like I'm kind of just doing this because that's what I'm supposed to do. We all get there. But that's where relationship with Christ comes in. Relationship with others, asking people. You should do a seminar. Asking people, what do you think of me? Here's what I think of me, but what do you think of me? Getting that input is important. You know, the problem is most of us want to be known, but we don't want to know. We want to be understood, but we don't want to understand. And really, the seminar is saying, let's get to a point where we're willing to understand and hear what others have to say about this. Paving the way for dialogue. Yes?
Just one interesting note that I noticed, difference between my husband's and mine was he scored himself very low. Like, categories were 50s and 40s. But
This poor guy.
no. And
Poor guy, man. She better not go on the road with you for
I'm just
conferences.
curious if other-
You're going to be her little guinea pig.
No, but I think he's so much harder on himself when he
Yes.
comes to scoring.
Sure.
Whereas, like, I'm like, you know, I got 70s and 80s over here, close to 90s,
Yes.
ranking myself. Whereas
Yes.
he's much more, and I don't know where that plays with the ego.
Well, the
or
thing is, this is
if
really
that's
not.
even linked with any of that.
Here's the
but-
thing. This is really not an empathy test. That's really code. It was really a vanity test. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, he's much more critical, you know. Like, and I just wonder how many other people were like he actually looked at mine and goes, "Wow, well, I'm in the 50s over here on all of these." Like, and I'm like, "Well, you did that to yourself, you know." But I'm sitting over here going, like, "Well, I'm in the 80s and 70s." But I don't know if there is something that speaks to the person if they're actually even analyzing that part about themselves, that they're so. And I mean, that's how he is. He's very, very real and true, but
Sure.
but also probably doesn't give himself as much credit. Whereas others are like, I'm a 10, I'm a 10, I'm a 9, 10. You know what I mean? Yes. Yeah, you're a 10 in my book, but.
Just being humble. Well, let me say this. Hopefully by the end of this seminar today, we have 2 more segments. It's divided into 3 segments. As we get deeper into cognitive, emotional, and practical empathy, you may take the test again afterwards and realize, I'm not as high or strong in this particular area as I thought I was, and I need some practice and some help. So we're all learning, we're all growing. We need each other's input to grow. He didn't create us to grow in a bubble. He created us to grow in relationships. Iron sharpening iron. Somebody else before we go to break for about 10 minutes? Yes.
One of the things I found in my walk is when I get into situations that are difficult, or I always stop and I say, God, make me humble.
Yeah, it's a great prayer.
And what
He's
would,
all
and
over
then
that
my
usually.
next question in my brain would be, what would Jesus do?
Hmm.
You know, because then you kind of put all three of those together
Absolutely.
and try to respond. You know, again, there's that responsible,
Yes.
how are you going to respond? You know, this is a learned process, trust me. You know, always gritting my teeth when something happens. Oh, what would Jesus do? You know, it's
Jesus is the ultimate standard. What would be a real fun exercise is to take these descriptions of empathy, go through the gospel. I had my students do this in a counseling class at a college I teach at in Massachusetts. Go through the gospel and give me examples from the life of Christ that fit cognitive, emotional, and practical empathy, and you will see that he was the epitome of empathy in everything that he did. Let that mind that was in him, let that mind also be in us. I'm going to dismiss you for 10 minutes. We're going to come back here at 11:40, right? We're going to go on for about 45 minutes to an hour, have lunch. After lunch, segment 3. Make sense? See you in 10 minutes. Get snacks, coffee, whatever.